Why hello there, and welcome back to Tabletop Ferox. Now, in my last 5 one-page RPG reviews video, I suggested that I may or may not have been saving some games for a future video. And, this is that video. 5 one-page slasher RPGs. As I have probably mentioned, I am quite the fan of slasher movies, and there were a few slasher-themed games in the one-page RPG Jam this year, so I thought, I could probably find a few more and do a whole video themed around slasher games for Spooky Month, which it is now, and that is what I am now doing. And in a slight change from normal, I will be including games that are one page front and back, aka 2 pages, just because the more specific I get with the theming here, the less restrictive I can be. Alright, so that all out of the way, let's get slashing with our first game, Body Count Movie, which is a solo journaling point crawl game with the extra little fun bit of the map being randomly generated at the beginning of each game. From there, however, it is standard crawl stuff. Move from one location to another, roll to see what happens there, write about it, and then move on. So, as much as I like the idea of a game based around slasher movies, I'm literally doing an entire video on it, it is hardly an original concept. And since that is the general theme of this entire video, this is basically going to apply to every game I talk about, unless otherwise stated. It is, however, a game that I feel suffers a little bit from being one page. Like, they're definitely trying to provide you with a full experience here, but there's so much that has to be explained, and so little space to do it, that it can be a little difficult to really figure everything out with how minimal the rules are. Like, I'll be honest with you here, I still don't really know what to do with that D6 table that goes from 1 to 12. And, text on a page. And next up, Bonfire Bloodbath. A simple little game about sexy teenagers trying to not get killed at a summer camp, which is accomplished by characters starting at random locations through which the killer moves, prompting a save versus death roll whenever the killer enters a location with one or more characters. And that's pretty much it. So they do put quite a bit into theming, a number of tables for generating your sexy teenagers and whatnot, and I guess everything works out mechanically and whatnot, but it is just one of those things where it feels more like a board game without a board than a role-playing game. It is essentially just be at a location, then roll a d8 versus a d12 when the killer arrives, then either die or move to another location. Like, it feels much more like the base concept for a game to be built around than it does a finished game. And as for aesthetics, well, they tried. And now, Slasher OneShot System. A fairly simple little game focusing on characters getting killed at a party by some kind of monster. It uses a fairly simple D6-based system and definitely keeps to the theming with character types like cheerleader, jock, and nerd, as well as providing a large number of random tables to keep things a bit chaotic. And as mentioned, there is a decent amount of content here with decent theming, but there are some issues. Like, each character has an associated sin and speciality, which is just one of the D&D attributes, but as far as I can tell, neither of those things actually have any effect in-game. Also, some of the table results seem like maybe another pass or two would have done them some good, and then there's also this whole endgame twist table that just kind of feels unnecessary overall. But on the other hand, I do really like the skill system. Characters get 3 skills which are ranked either good or awesome, and the way this is handled is just a lower threshold for success on the results table. And I'm not sure if I've ever seen skill bonuses handled that way specifically, and mechanically it is nothing impressive, but it is a clever way to convey the skill application in an absolute minimum amount of space. So, kind of a -1 + 1 = 0 type situation here. And it looks meh, honestly. It's dark and spooky colored, but definite focus on function over style. So now on to Final Girl Support Group, which, as you may have guessed, is a game about a support group for final girls, each sharing the story of their harrowing ordeal which led them to being final girls. Basically, the player draws a card, then uses the provided prompt list to prompt another player to tell their story. And then there's also some mechanics in place for letting other players jump in and try and steer the story themselves, and then trying to take it back the person telling the story, and so on and so on. So a really cool idea here, taking the basic concept of a slasher, but framing it in such a way that each player gets to be the final girl and tell their own story, while still giving the other players a way to interact with that story. It is, however, another one of those games where I like what I'm seeing, but I'd really like to see the idea developed a little further. It is essentially just players taking turns telling stories with a little bit of mechanics mixed in, and it feels like a concept that could very well be expanded beyond that. And basically just words on a page with some thought put into it and little graphics, although the main text can be a little difficult to read. And finally, Scream the Horror, a game with quite a few interesting ideas. The most notable one being that failing a roll isn't an automatic failure. Instead, failing gives the horror an action, which could be used to make the action fail or do other appropriately spooky things. The other big notable aspect being that after a character dies, their player joins the horror. Then, when a roll is failed, all horror players get an action. So every time a character dies, it not only ramps up the terror, but more importantly, gives the players whose characters have died something to do with the rest of the game. There's also a system of rewards for doing stupid but genre-appropriate things, which, I like, but have also seen a few times before already, so it's, not as impressive. So, very well done overall. They deal with the biggest issue in this kind of game, what to do after your character dies, in a way that feels like an integral part of the game's intended flow, not just a quick fix to that problem. And the roll system is also really clever. It is something of an interesting distancing of mechanics from narrative. Failing a roll has a negative outcome, but that outcome doesn't need to be related to the task that the roll was made for. The mechanics influence the story, but in a more indirect way. Also, SCREAM is an acronym for the skills Sports, Cool, Read, Escape, Attack, and Mend, and I always enjoy a good backronym. And it looks okay, spooky, and on the higher side of average. And those were 5 one-page slasher RPGs. Much like slasher movies, a very mixed bag, but each one does have something to offer, be it a roughly interesting gameplay loop or a really clever solution to a common problem in these kinds of games. So hopefully you've enjoyed this more themed look at one-page role-playing games. If you have, make sure to hit the like button and whatnot so that I know people like that format, and then I might do more in a similar format in the future. But as for now, thank you for watching, with extra special thanks to my Fightin' Flail Snails, Samuel Gorski, Randy Mulholland, and Toshiro Kuro. If you'd like to be cool like them, you can check out my Patreon, where you can get early access to videos and fun stuff that I make for the Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, you can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time. Although you might not see me coming.